Welcome to the ClassCast podcast, where philosophy, policy, pedagogy, and people come together in honest, purposeful conversations about improving school and education for our students and our communities. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens, an award-winning English teacher, speaker, tutor, and podcast host in Northern Virginia. You can listen and subscribe to the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services, on YouTube, and at classcastpodcast.com. Ladies and gentlemen, class is in session. Welcome to the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with the founder and CEO of the Institute for Education Innovation, Doug Roberts. Doug is working very hard, and today's a long day for him. We're looking at all different ways that we can serve superintendents and help to connect them to technology solutions in as far as I can tell, sort of a wide variety of ways. A lot of different sort of ways that you're connecting private enterprise and entrepreneurs with superintendents to, I guess, ultimately sort of give the best services to the students, right? I mean, that would be the ultimate end game. So Doug, thank you very much for taking the time to talk today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
But doing all right. I think we're all working too hard at the moment, but that's how it goes. So tell me just a little bit in general about IEI, Institute for Education Innovation. How did the organization, sort of come to exist, and what is the mission?
Sure. Our mission is to increase communication, break down communication gaps between educators, educational leaders, the investors in K-12 solutions, and the executives and entrepreneurs who run K-12 industry organizations. So we believe that many who have tried to build a business in the K-12 industry have learned that it can be very hard to do business with public school agencies. And, my perspective is that the answer is not to run away from what's hard, but rather if you have a solution that wants to serve students and teachers, then you need to go do the hard work to get the relationships built in order to grow that business as a partner to K-12 school districts. I built IEI in partnership with school superintendents to do that in a way that meets their learning goals, that is directed by their sort of preferences, and their preferences are driven by the kids, families, teachers, other administrators, and board members that they work with. So we're a superintendent-driven organization that seeks to feed back into the industry ideas for making better solutions.
Right. Yeah, and it is one of the things that I think makes, education a difficult sort of space to work in, is that you have so many people who think of themselves as the customer, right? If you're a tech company, you're trying to present the solution, you have the superintendent, you might have to deal with the school board, you're going to have whatever other advisory staff, you also have teachers, you also have students, and you have the parents. In the end, not all of those people are going to be sitting in the room making the decision of whether we adopt this new tool or not. But all those people are going to end up with their hands on it at some point. And so it can be a difficult discussion to navigate. For you, how did you get into the education industry? Like what was your entry point? Were you a teacher? Were you from the tech side? What do you do?
I was a teacher. I was a teacher in a teaching job that was not a great fit, mostly because I was driving 90 minutes each way, 3 hours a day in a car. So I was looking for another teaching job, frankly. It was a rookie mistake to take on that. I was excited about the district, and I was excited about the apartment where I was living. So I was looking for another district, and I stumbled into a friend of a friend had started a company that was doing, this is way back in the olden days of 2001, an online tutoring company using a shared whiteboard and audio voice over IP. And he needed to hire teachers to write curriculum. And so I went and did that. And that turned into a career. I got promoted, and all of a sudden I'm a product manager, and then I'm a salesperson, and then I'm a VP of sales, and on and on. And it's been the job I held the longest in my career when I worked at larger organizations was with Amplify, which was then called Wireless Generation. I spent about 5.5 years there, kind of cut my teeth, and from there launched a consulting business that sought to help startup companies. I love working with the early stage companies. So Educational Solutions Consulting was my business that worked with entrepreneurs as they sought to grow their business in the K-12 space. Through that, though, started to build a really great set of relationships with a network of, loose network of school superintendents who I gotten to know over the years, and started talking to folks about, we all agree that relationships are everything in this business. You have to, because because schools are people institutions, they're people businesses. You've got to build relationships with the people who run those schools and those school districts, and the people who run school districts make decisions based on personal relationships, because there's so much trust. Schools are by nature risk averse institutions. They're dealing with public money. It's a slow process to buy things. You have to get 5 or 7 or however many your majority of your board is to vote on something, to try something new. Public and community pressure can be intense. So because of that, you work with people who you trust. And so in talking to these school superintendents, I thought, well, what if we can find a different way for you to get to know these companies? And let's go try to find some of these companies that are a little off the beaten path and give everybody, level the playing field, so that regardless of whether you've raised 100 million or you're bootstrapping with a loan from your uncle, you've got a shot at building the relationships to grow your business. And so I worked with superintendents to start this thing, and really I got a few kind of strong messages. Let us choose, turn the process of meeting with the partners into a learning opportunity for me. And that's, let me show up and tell you what I'm working on, and what, I want to learn from these folks because they've gone super deep on the thing they're working on. And so I can quickly learn everything that they know about a particular topic, whether it's social emotional learning, assessment, digital instruction, et cetera. 2, keep the meeting short. Don't, let us get an introduction. Then if our district wants to talk to them, I'll bring them in later to talk to everyone else, because I don't make the decisions. I facilitate, and I let my team make decisions, which I think you've seen a shift in that. There's been a much more kind of, a lot of our districts, I think, have built really collaborative decision-making processes over the last 10 years or so, 15 years. And then the last thing they said was, we need opportunities to connect. There aren't a lot of people around us who have walked in our shoes, especially not at work. You're the only one. You've got a board to report.
You're at the top.
Or politicians, and then you have people that you have to lead. So give us time to reflect and recharge, and give me something I can bring back and work on. But also, let's, we tend to go to places that are a little more reflective, out in the mountain air, or et cetera. So, I got those 3 messages from superintendents, that this was a niche that someone could fill, and if I jumped in to fill it, that they would support it and help me build it. Yeah. And that's where we are.
That's awesome. I mean, and thinking about that, you're right. Like, the relationship piece can be really important. And I mean, that's in a lot of businesses, but I think it's a core value in education that, even as a teacher, it's hard to be a good teacher in K-12 and not have relationships with your students. You can do it, but not often, not well. College professors sometimes sneak by, but it's rare you're going to find a K-12 teacher who can do it. Yeah. And the same thing then goes for the principals with them, for the superintendents on down.
It's intensely two-way work, right? Yeah. A lot of, it's not create an app and push it out there and let people play with it. It's very much a back and forth two-way work, and you have to engage each other. And that's why companies that don't engage with district leaders tend to not be able to do so well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and you're right, because every school division is different, both in terms of the demographics and their specific needs, but also in terms of like the package of technology that they're working with. So sometimes we end up with these really sort of interesting problems where, 2 vendors suddenly have to work together to find a solution. And in the end, all you're doing is, I'm sitting there as a classroom teacher going, look, I need this to talk to this. And, these are things that are possible, but I certainly wouldn't know how to do it. And so when you can have not only good companies that can work together, but where you have that good sort of flow of communication going in 2 directions, where, we're getting feedback from the classroom all the way up the chain of command to the company. And likewise, you want a responsive company. And that's a place that's where, I don't know that I'd say this every time, but in general, I think that I probably prefer smaller ed tech vendors because they tend to be more responsive. Now, sometimes, I mean, you run into some problems early on, but when they either, need or really want your business, you tend to get better service. When you go with, say one of the biggest companies in the country, you might get this, well-prepared, built out sort of service. But if it's not working for you, they're not always, real eager or in a big hurry to adapt and do something special for you. And that sort of leads into my question, which I'm trying to figure out like a polite way of phrasing it. But essentially, school divisions they can vary widely based on, geography, local culture, but size is a big one, right? And so I grew up in Pennsylvania where you do districts, and there's one superintendent for one district. Most districts have one high school, maybe two, and now I live and work in Virginia where everything's based on the county. And so I have some friends who work at ed tech companies, and they all, I don't want to say unanimously, but pretty close. Almost all of them complain about how, so as you move into the Northeast and you get these sort of smaller districts, because one, they have so many different sales pitches they have to make. It's so many different clients. It's so much harder to get enough of those contracts to equal what would have been one bigger school system, or just say one county in another part of the country. Do you see a difference in these relationships, or do you see a difference in like what the superintendents ask for based on the size of their system or based on where they're at? Or in the end, do they all want essentially the same thing?
You do see a difference. You see, the smaller districts, smaller bureaucracy, and less people whose heads you have to get to nod, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a small thing. Like the companies that eschew working with small districts, I think that's the ones I can think of that did that. It didn't go well, and they eventually either had to redirect and figure it out, because the kids in America go to the school that's in their town, in their community, right? So the really successful K-12 businesses have buttered their bread on the exurbs of Metro Atlanta and the Indiana suburbs of Cincinnati or Chicago, right? Like those districts with 5,000 kids or 12,000 kids or whatever. And we have a bunch of them in our group. That's where you go to build a business, just as much as you go to LA Unified or Boston Public Schools. But the key, the bootstrappers, I think, by those, I mean companies who have not taken venture capital money, but maybe some friends and family, maybe their own funding. When you don't have that venture capital mindset breathing down your back, that they want to make 100x return on the money they put into your company, then I think you have the freedom to work with districts as they're meant to be worked with. Slower sales cycles than the rest of the universe, right? Like K-12 is a slow sales cycle. Those companies are free to kind of really just be reactive and listen to what districts need, and to go, to be a successful K-12 business, you don't have to be in 50 states. You don't have to be in 25 of the top 50 districts in terms of size. You can have one signature large district win, and you can have 20 districts that are 5 to 25,000 students, and you get a viable business. Like that's a business that can then grow. The hardest thing to do in this business is get from 0 to 1. Right. The second hardest thing is to get from 1 to 10. And a lot of companies too, especially depend like more kind of classroom focused solutions or curriculum based solutions, they'll sell at the school level. And that's how people will start to, they'll have someone, if they're based in LA, they'll have someone drive around and meet with LA Unified principals, or in Chicago or New York, one of the big cities, DC. You can build a school-based business in one of those cities, and that can launch you. It's probably not going to launch you if you've got 20 schools in New York City. I've seen this one so many times. You're almost less likely to get a big deal with New York City DOE, but the 20 schools in New York City will look great in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or in Trenton, New Jersey,
right.
et cetera. So working in the Northeast is a very different proposition versus, Virginia, Maryland, Georgia, Florida, right? You got all these big county-based systems, and and that county-based approach has impacts on down the line, right? On the other side, on the family and parent side, you either your kid goes to school in one of like 25 elementaries in a huge county, or a small district where you might bump into the deputy superintendent for curriculum at the coffee shop, right? Like that's
Yeah.
It's each state gets to set its own way of breaking down its school systems, and companies, I talk a lot with our partners about their strategy, and because a lot of the new ones, sometimes the ones who come to us for the first time, they just sign up all the big districts, right? Like, oh, I want Kansas City and Pittsburgh, who are both in our group. And I'm like, well, don't do all the big districts, because then you're going to basically be sitting there waiting for 18, 24 months and nothing may happen. Whereas 15,000 students outside of Atlanta, they can kind of make something happen quick if they want something,
Right.
And that's sort of, it's one of the idiosyncrasies. Whenever I talk to a lot of companies overseas, Israel, UK, Eastern Europe, you have to explain to them how this works, because in a lot of countries, there's just one education ministry and you sell to them.
Right. Yeah. And well, and you make an interesting point about how smaller systems are kind of nimble, excuse me, in ways that, sometimes your funding is tougher, your staffing might be tougher, but if you want to do something, you want to make some moves. I mean, we're talking about, the Institute for Education Innovation. Like, if you really want to innovate, I think sometimes we hear the names of either, city schools, bigger city schools, or wealthier suburbs where you can fund a pilot program or something like this. I always think like where I teach is a large suburban, wealthy suburban school division.
Mm-hmm.
And where I live is the county west, where there is one high school in the whole county.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, I don't think I would ever want to be a superintendent, but if I did, granted, it's a noticeable pay cut, but I would take the smaller county, because you can actually do something there, because there's so many fewer people that you need to get on board. Like, you have a tighter staff. And so I always think about that, like, you might have the money or the clout that comes with a larger system, but in terms of actually being able to impact students, or being able to create some sort of meaningful and noticeable change, almost the smaller system, may have a slight advantage there. How do superintendents that you work with sort of feel about that? Like, there's sort of this divide in this role where, as a superintendent, on one hand, it's almost like a public administration thing. Like, I have to keep the ship afloat. We've got to run this. I mean, it's not really a business, but you've got to keep the taxpayers happy. I mean, it is, but not in the traditional sense. But I mean, we need to sort of run this thing efficiently and blah, blah, blah. But on the other side, you're also still the head of instruction. Like, you're still there as essentially the leader of the teachers and the instructional staff. But those aren't necessarily things that are easily remedied. Like, what's good for a school system is not always the same thing that's good for the teachers or the students in the schools. Not to say that they're, mutually exclusive, but it's a really complicated job, because you're being pulled in a couple of different directions. Do the superintendents you work with feel that way? And if they do, how do you remedy that? Like, I don't even know how I'd begin to wrap my head around that if that was my job.
I mean, I'm amazed at how talented some of these leaders are that I work with. I'm amazed at some of the, which may not seem to the outsider to be a risk, but, a lot of our folks, the IEI Supes, partners come to our group because these folks are willing to be the first in the state or county to try some crazy new thing that no one's ever heard of, right? They're like, telehealth was sort of not a thing in schools 2 years ago. And Hazel Health came to our event. And all of a sudden you have a couple of our like rural South Carolina districts and all these other talking to, they're going to talk about bringing telehealth into a school in a place that's not something that anybody conceived of in a school district before. They're willing to take those risks because they know their communities, they know where they stand in their sort of their contract and where they stand with their board, and they know kind of who's on their team and how folks will approach it, and they know how to work it through their system, right? So I think the successful Supes know their own systems really well, and they know their own people really well. And so then they've got to figure out what's the right fit for them. I just came off of our Aspiring Superintendent Institute Monday night Zoom call. This is our last Monday night. We have our in-person final graduation in a couple of weeks in Cleveland. And we're coaching that group around how to find the right job and how to look for, we spent tonight on boards, right? How do you analyze from afar how a board works and figure out if you want to work for that board or not, right? you got to pick the right place. And so, yes, you can climb the ladder, as it were, and go from this district to this district, and go to a bigger district, till you get to someplace really big. And, then your average tenure is probably much shorter. And you want to try to beat those odds. You can get the big paycheck, and, some huge districts, you get like a car with a driver, right? Big cities, a lot of times there's a school resource officer who follows you around everywhere to make sure you're safe, right? Cool perks to the job. But, you sacrifice, you become even more of a public figure than you already are. That's what's so unique about this job, is that they're not elected. There are a couple of elected Supes around the country, but mostly they're not. They're appointed. Yeah. But you have kind of the downsides of being an elected official, and that you're in the public. And then we got to talk a little bit about this year that we're having, where you've seen a concerted effort to politicize Board of Ed meetings around issues that are really more kind of national political discussions versus discussions about school business, the business of schools. And that has really taken a toll. It's interesting that we had a educational leaders of color workshop 2 weekends ago. And I shared with the group that, I learned the term optics from superintendent members of ours who were people of color. And I didn't really understand what they meant. And then they sort of explained it to me, like, it doesn't look like the guy who works in the next town over from me does not get criticized or, rumors in the paper, whatever, when he goes to a conference that has vendors and a couple nice dinners, but I do. It's right. Optics. Like, it doesn't look good. And we have a problem. We have an equity problem in district leadership and superintendenting, which is what this event was all about. But what's changed in this pandemic is that now everybody's got the optics problem.
Now everybody gets the scrutiny.
Everyone gets this, and I think, unfair scrutiny, because, but these are passionately held beliefs. Like, if you're someone who doesn't think that kids should be required to wear masks, and your state or district is requiring your kid to wear a mask, yeah, you're kind of upset if the superintendent's not there making sure that, like, if the superintendent's out of the office and you're mad about the masks, it's a very easy thing to pick off. And so a lot of people are saying, you know what, this year I'm going to kind of stay close to home. And, we're experiencing, every district has suddenly become politically complicated. And I think a lot of our members are now experiencing what it is like all the time, every year, for others of our members, based on how they look.
Yeah, no, well, and that's exactly, that was going to be my next question, because the episode that's actually I should be releasing, now it's coming out. So, what we're talking about right now, people will hear this in a couple of weeks. The preceding episode is basically me talking about the idea of, like, centralizing sort of decision-making processes, which is, I think, just sort of a trend we're seeing in education. There was a lot of standardized testing. Now we're trying to, in a lot of places, we're trying to reduce the amount of testing, not necessarily to get rid of
how quick that happened, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're on the
pandemic.
20-year
we're not testing anymore.
Yeah.
What?
Well, and some places the talk had been, maybe we can reduce the number a little bit, and then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, like, boom, there we are. But I think what's really interesting is we have, as we're saying, we're not going to standardize, say, the test. What we're seeing is that at the local and sometimes the state level, you're getting this sort of centralized decision-making process where we're adopting, new books, or an equity program, or a history curriculum, or just a textbook, or, whatever it is. But all of it has become ultra politicized. And the point that I sort of make is that, and it's not as simple as maybe I'm going to make it sound, but there are times in the not so distant past where the individual classroom teacher, or maybe the department chair, was handling some of these decisions in the school. So if a parent had a concern, you talked to your kid's teacher, you talk to the principal, we have a civil discussion, we all have met each other, we all work directly with the kid, and we figure out a solution, right? But when more and more of these decisions are being made by the school board or an upper administration, when parents feel that they're somehow disenfranchised, or when they get angry for whatever the reason may be, you go talk to the teacher and the teacher's like, yeah, I don't know, this is what they gave me. And so more of those complaints are climbing the ladder to the place where the decision was made. And so on one hand, I understand, if I'm the superintendent, or if I'm the, the director of the supervisor of history, or, whatever the subject area is, I I got the job because I want to have this influence, because I may want to innovate or, do whatever. But if I'm the one making the call, I now have to handle all of these complaints. And that's got to be increasingly difficult and a little bit scary, I think, for a lot of people thinking, especially if you're earlier in your career, it's like, how do I weather this and still maintain my trajectory? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you already said like people are maybe a little concerned and shook about it. Do you think that this is the kind of thing that's going to have a lasting impact
Yes.
on people's willingness to say innovate or to make changes in schools?
Yes. Yep. Look, people want to keep their jobs, right? I mean, it's a natural human instinct to want to provide for one's family, and stay employed. And so there, you're going to see some people are going to potentially get shouted out of trying to do innovative things. People are deciding not to come to an event where they can learn about the next new thing that's coming because they're just worried about how it'll look back home. We're seeing, I know of several really talented, just amazing, salt of the earth educators who, might be getting toward retirement years, but probably would stick it out another, renew a contract for another year or two, who are just saying, you know what, I think this is the time for me to hang it up.
Yeah.
We'll see some of them come back. Like a big move that a lot of these folks do, and I like to tease them about it because I think it's one of the most insane things that people do in their careers. But for superintendents, they're just like, oh yeah, whatever. I retired in Iowa and I got a job in South Dakota, right? They move, their kids are grown and gone or in college, and they move an hour away across the state border because you can retire in one state, get pension, and then now you're not as like, you don't care as much about you're not going to negotiate every penny on this new
Right. Yeah, I already got the pension coming in. That's literally my retirement plan.
And also
retire in Virginia and then teach in West Virginia for a few years. Easy way to do
right.
it. Yeah,
people do it. And then there's also this whole thing where we were talking about big and small districts earlier. So I know a ton of folks who ran big, large urban systems when they were kind of younger and fired up and had the energy, and they were able to kind of write their own ticket, resign or retire in that state, then move and do 2,500 kids somewhere, right, at a similar or maybe even higher pay rate, right, with less of the drama. So, the point of talking about all this stuff, though, is we're going to see a lot of really talented people walk out of the halls of public education. We're seeing it with teacher. We're going to have we've been talking about a teacher shortage for a long time, but it's going to get even worse. And of course, it will impact less privileged socioeconomically less privileged communities more than it will impact the more privileged socioeconomically community. So that's a real thing. And that's why for us, we started IEI Lead this year, because we have so many great people in our network, in our community. And we're actively trying to develop the next generation of district leaders and show people that this could be a great career if you have the interest, passion, and let us help you kind of build the network and build some of the skills that you need to go find that superintendent job. So I'm really excited. We're having about 30 aspiring superintendents come through us this year and spend time with our network. And we let them come and try out the event as well. And I hope that we're helping to cultivate the next generation of district leaders.
Yeah. And I mean, and somebody's got to be doing it, because as you pointed out, the amount of turnover that we're seeing in sort of all levels of education is in some ways scary. I mean, it could ultimately be a good thing. I mean, it could lead to just sort of a sea change, if suddenly the profession gets a little bit younger, or you're only, seeing people enter who maybe aren't as risk averse, you're moving into a hot seat. It's a different kind of person that willingly takes on the job. And so, I mean, who knows what the ripple effect of that will be. But I'm curious, we're talking about primarily public schools, but we have a lot of places where there are public charters or I mean, just, some places where we're seeing just increases in the number of private schools or private charters, et cetera. And so some of the political sort of influences here, and I don't mean to get into the political side of it too much, but a lot of this is influenced directly or indirectly by some of the school choice movement. And so when you're thinking about this from the perspective of someone who's sort of creating the bridge between education leadership and the private firms, entrepreneurs, et cetera, in the end, a sale is a sale. But for you, do you work exclusively with public, or do you see the market for charter and private increasing? Like, is that affecting the business model at all, or is that affecting the conversation?
Ours?
Well, for you individually, but I mean, maybe just the people you're working with, are tech firms approaching it all differently now?
So IEI is agnostic to what funds your school system. If you're a great leader of schools, you're a great, you could, like, we'll take CMO, executive directors. A one-off private school is kind of tough. I think doesn't quite work for us, but we've had people who run networks of private schools. So we're happy. Like, we take people from archdiocese. Like, if you're a great leader and you want to innovate and you want to learn about this stuff and you're willing to roll up your sleeves and sit with our community and help us problem solve when we get together a few times a year, you're welcome to reach out to us about applying. That's not, but I will tell you that I find that generally speaking, I found the charter community less interested in what we do. I'm not sure why that is. But part of it, I think, is that people who lead charters tend to be younger, more tech forward, more sort of oriented around innovation. Like, they left the traditional school system to go to this kind of outside thing. And so I know that a lot of the companies who come in that are new, younger companies, I don't mean the people's age, I mean the age of the company itself and the solution. They tend to get their start. I talked before about some will go sell school to school in a city. A lot of them the charter people return your emails. Like, they read their emails, they return it.
Right.
And so you can get somebody to respond. You can get a partnership going really easy with a charter school because you don't have all of the bureaucratic stuff. You don't need a board of ed to vote on something in most charters. So a lot of our companies work with charters and they go to events that are targeting charters. We've had a couple come through our group, and may again. I was just talking with the Belmont Charter Network in Philly about potentially coming to our event. So, but it's the way I always tell companies, though, like, if you've done a bunch of business with charter networks, just understand it's a completely different conversation than with districts. Yeah. And in some places, charter school is a bad word. I think the folks I've heard talk about it from our network, IEI superintendents, they kind of like welcome the competition. If you're going to set, and some of them have, some states and some districts, their board has voted to be a school choice environment, like within the community. So if you live on one side of town, you can choose to go to a school on the other side of town as long as you get in the lottery. So, that kind of thing. And then now you've got competition coming from outside companies that are doing direct instruction. You can now take an entire program virtually, which we just saw during the pandemic. So our folks welcome the competition, and they see it as a way to get better.
Love it. So in that sort of talk about, the difference between, say, working with the charters versus public, et cetera. You made mention of one of my favorite phrases that sort of accidentally pops up in a lot of these conversations, which is bureaucratic stuff, right? And when I'm talking to someone, I mean, anyone who's interested in schools, but especially anyone who's interested in the concept of innovation, right? Sometimes the things that limit our ability to try something new is the very structure that supports the ability to try, right? Like, I can't do anything in a classroom if I don't have a classroom, but the same system that provides me the classroom sometimes makes it really difficult to try something, right? And as you pointed out, most public school systems and the people who work in it tend to be, on average, sort of risk averse. So when we think about, the bureaucratic stuff that gets in the way, if we could remove all of that, and I'm asking you sort of from your own perspective, not speaking for your clients or anything like that, if you had the opportunity to run your own school, and there's no other problems, whatever, what would be your ideal school? What would be your favorite way to provide education to young people?
That's such a hard question. I'm going to go with, we were just talking about kind of like bureaucracy and processes for procuring. That's kind of like the world I live in. So I could answer this a million different ways. Like, I'd want it to look like, I'd want it to basically look like John Dewey's vision, right? That's what I was trained in as a teacher. But I think one thing I would really like to see more of, I'm going to shout out my friend Jess Gartner and her company Allaview. They have technology. They're a education financial tech solution. They have technology that would make it possible for every teacher to be given a budget and let those teachers just decide what tools they're going to use and not use. I would love to see the industry be able to support that. So another company we work with a lot is ClassLink, right? A lot of people know them. They do single sign-on. They allow a kid to log in once and then log in a bunch of different stuff. And they're an enterprise play. Like, you got to buy it district-wide and everyone has to use it, right? What if there were a way to get the functionality of ClassLink so that you don't have these silos where a kid has to log into 8 different things and everything's kind of talking to each other. And you, in your classroom, you just get your allotment there. You serve X number of students. Each classroom gets the same amount. And so then teachers can make decisions about what is best for their own style, their pedagogy, the kids that are sitting in front of them. Like, maybe you don't have to make a decision about it's absurd in 2021 that you have to decide 3 years in advance what book to teach a kid, right? Like, these guys can go on their devices and find, like, my kid's 7. She comes up with these like crazy shows about unicorns that no one's ever heard of, right? And she decides it in the moment. Like, but in school, we have to decide what book you're reading 3 years ago. What if I get in front of this group and I'm like, what would be good for these guys? A VR game about, whatever I'm trying to teach, like ancient Egypt or something, right? So, and does it fit my budget? Yeah, it fits my budget. And so there's control of the public dollars, which you need. They need the fiduciary responsibility of the Board of Ed they have to have oversight, but it's an entirely teacher-driven system. And that means we got to hire teachers that we believe in and that we can trust in that kind of a system. That's the kind of thing I could see. And if you have technology like Allaview to manage the financial piece of it, it could potentially work. This is pie in the sky stuff, but that, believing in teachers to me is, and that's something that is all through all of our work, because all our members, they were teachers once. They got into this because they love kids and want to make things happen for kids.
Yeah, no, and I think you got to check out episode 79, the one that's actually being released today on the day we're talking. That's a huge part of the discussion. It's just solo, it's just me talking, but the whole thing is that as teachers sort of lose the trust, and I say the trust, in some cases it's public trust, in some cases I think it's institutional trust, that when a school system hits a certain size, you sort of hit this tipping point and they're said, well, you know what, we need to standardize it. We can't have kids having these wildly different experiences across it, which from the administrative perspective, it makes sense. Your job is to administrate. You need to put some boundaries on it. The problem is all you're essentially doing is sort of like handcuffing and limiting the very people who you say you want to empower to make the choices and adapt. If you want me to be able to make a decision and flex to serve the students in front of me, like to actually differentiate for them, then I have to have the flexibility in my own materials, my own resources, my own options to do it. If you give me a list of 4 books and say choose, it's better than you giving me one. But 4 years ago, I had a 50 book list, and now I'm down to 4 and 5. And so my ability to make that choice is limited, because somewhere along the line, someone either said, that sort of specialization is either undesirable, or we don't necessarily trust all the individuals making those choices. And it turns into this weird cycle where we, in certain ways, teachers lose some of the decision-making power. And as a result, teaching looks less attractive to very creative people and critical thinkers. Why do I want a job that doesn't really ask me to do a lot of the thinking? I'm just there as a glorified sub doing what someone else asked me to do. And so I never really thought about it from the financial perspective, though. Like, you're right, some of the details would be messy, but if you could manage it and keep the accounting straight, if you have good teachers, then you should let them pick the tools. When I if I'm going to build a house, I get the best builder in the area. I don't hand them the tools. I trust that within the budget I'm paying him, he's going to get the tools he needs to build me the best house he can.
Right.
Why would I be the guy to give him his tools? I trust him to do it. That's why that's why I hired him. And like you said, pie in the sky, easier to say than do, but I agree. I mean, I think that would be fantastic. Is that something, thinking about, obviously it would present difficulties for the vendors, like that's not the best way to sell something. So, I mean, I understand the dilemma there. Do you think that there would be superintendents open to maybe to any form of that? Like, would they be willing to hand over some of that control, or is that just like, that's counter to what I'm doing here? Like,
no. I think there are some who would believe in, who have attempted and are implementing forms of that. Right. And there are pieces of this that you can do. I think like one way that happens is with extracurriculars, right? A lot of times extracurriculars, you just get a budget and you do whatever you're going to do, right? Like no one's trying to micromanage what happens at chess club.
Right.
So, right, just keep kids safe, play chess, right? So, I think part of what we struggle with in education is that everybody has been to school, right? Not everyone has built a house. You used that analogy earlier. So everyone's been to school. So when you go to a board meeting and you want to yell at the Board of Ed about something you don't like in the curriculum, or right now what we're seeing is people have invented a notion that critical race theory is being taught in their school because they saw it on TV news or on Facebook, and they're like, why are you teaching? And then they're like, we're not. There's always, but it goes on it goes to other aspects of the business too. Like, philanthropists, venture capitalists, some of them have said, it would be cool if schools were, did this or that, or if they had a tool that did this or that, and then they can just put money behind that and go make the tool and try it out. Right. Because they figure, well, I went to school, I've got some ideas and I've got couple bucks, so you got to listen to my ideas and try it out. And essentially what's the irony of all this is that for a long time, really like the 2000s, most of them, until kind of recently, I think the pandemic has changed how people think about it. I think people trust their superintendents more because of the heroic work that they all just did. But the business model that was being pushed by particularly Silicon Valley in ed tech was just bypass the district and create something that goes grassroots to teachers, and then it'll sort of like bubble its way up. You get the teachers on board and that's all you need. And like, so that's essentially that the industry was kind of trying to push more toward this utopian vision I just laid out, where teachers decide everything. I think you have some leaders who are willing to try some of that. And if people experiment with some of these models, and if you have leaders that you trust at the school level, just believe in teachers. That's what I would, whatever I do, if I were to run a school, would be about that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's easier said than done, but like in so many other businesses, if you get the right people, you can trust that those people are going to do their jobs, and so I agree. I think that it's also a good way for a lot of the innovation to occur. Like, when I attend a professional development session, they're like, hey, look at this great new thing and everyone can do it. I'm like, cool. I love options. And I will listen, I will take notes, and I will try it, maybe. What I want the tool in my toolbox. I don't want to be told that I have to use it. And so, say when the pandemic hit, we all shift online. I had the good fortune of working in an affluent area. And so we actually had the problem where it was almost like this flood of new tools. Like, we've got this app, we've got this website, we've got this thing, do it. I was like, hold up. My normal plan is I do usually 1, maybe 2 new things a year, because if I do more, I don't have, I lose the control group. I don't know, did this help or hurt?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh God, I guess I got to do more than one, so what are we going to do here? I had friends who work in places where they're like, I don't have anything that I need. And I thought I'd rather have too much than too little, but I also like having the ability to choose what works for me. And it takes different kind of leaders will take a different stance on that. We're all going to do blank, or here are the options that we've deemed acceptable or useful or affordable, so this is what you're going to use.
Thank you for rolling with those punches on behalf of your kids. I'm sure that was a really tough moment in your career. Appreciate it.
Hey, well, thank you. Yeah, it's nice, kind words. I took a weird turn. I now teach online all the time. My division's been talking for years about, oh, we're going to do an online,
Right.
sort of option.
A lot of
And the
people are doing
pandemic
it.
hit, and they were like, well, now or never. And I was like, well, I've got, your story about the hour and a half commute. Mine is about 50 minutes each way. And I was like, you know what, I got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and one on the way, man. It would be great to not spend an hour and a half in the car. And I kind of liked
Good for
online. And
you.
so we're making it work. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of changes that come from it, but through all of this, and this is sort of one of the core questions that I like to ask everyone, because I think the opinions and ideas are very different. We're talking about, say, adopting new technology, or we're talking about how to navigate a difficult time period, whether it's pandemic or political issues or whatever else. But all of this is built on the assumption that, like, schools are important and that we're doing something valuable. My question is, in your opinion or in your experience, what is the purpose of school? Like, we can get the best tools, the best people, all this stuff together, but we should have I believe, a more clear understanding of what it is we're specifically trying to accomplish. And that might vary slightly from school district to school district, but to you, what is the purpose of education? What's the purpose, or of public education? What's the purpose of school?
It's to give every kid an opportunity to achieve his or her goals in life, regardless of what he or she looks like, what background he or she comes from, rich, poor, middle class, etc. Every kid deserves an opportunity to meet their best and highest purpose in life. And so I think that's what school's about in it. And there's also an element of public school that is about our democracy and helping kids graduate with the ability to participate in our political system, to understand how to parse information, to discern fact from not fact, opinion, misinformation, right? We're seeing a lot of curriculum solutions coming in right now to help kids decipher information from disinformation. So, but I think that it's all those things, and it's about giving every kid an equal opportunity, regardless of the situation from which that kid comes.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, it's, you got like a little Thomas Jefferson in there with the informed citizenry and a whole bunch of the American dream, right? Regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of your birth, everybody should have the shot. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Like, schools should, empower the individual. And as a result of empowering each individual, in theory, we would be uplifting the whole community, because the individuals have more options and more abilities to take advantage of whatever options are available. So, I mean, that's good. Now, as we think about sort of working towards and achieving those goals, as we've already pointed out, there's a lot of different people who have to work together, particularly as you get into larger systems. But we have school boards, we have superintendents, we have that whole staff before we even get down to the school level, where we've got the school administrators and your teachers and all the rest. And so there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people influencing the ways that we get to those outcomes. And so one of the questions is, like, who drives that? And so I might be asking you a bad question. You're welcome to dodge or answer cautiously, but, like, you've already said, you believe in empowering the teachers, but you're also working very closely with the superintendents. And the answer that a teacher gives to a certain question might not be the same that the superintendent would give. When you think about that, sort of empowering that individual and helping students to see and take advantage of opportunities, who do you think drives that, or should be driving that? Like, is that something that individual teachers should be reacting to individual students? Or is it the superintendent who's driving the bus says, this is the best way to serve our community? Like, how do we make decisions about providing students with those skills and those opportunities?
You have to have very clear organizational goals, and then you have to have a strategy and plan that can be followed by the public and by the staff to get to those goals. I think if you set clear, achievable, actionable goals, I'm not sure about a lot of districts in the 2000s have been writing like 60-page, strategy, papers, or like mission papers. I'm not sure about all that. Like, I think you can have a one pager that just tells the community, this is what we're working on.
Yeah.
And this is how we're going to do it. And then watch it all play out. That can, if you get everyone aligned around if you have organizational alignment, and that, a lot of folks talk about organizational alignment. They don't mean just the teachers and administrators. They mean everyone who works inside of the system. The folks who maintain the physical plant and the grounds, bus drivers, food service workers, aides, etc. But that's the one way to do that is just if you keep the goal simple, then the bus driver or the high school teacher or whomever should be able to tell you, like, this is the goal of our system and this is what I do to make sure that we achieve that goal.
Yeah. No, and I think it's great. It's the classic keep it simple, stupid. If it takes you more than a page to explain what you're trying to accomplish in your school system, I think you've probably significantly decreased the chances you're going to achieve it. Not only because it's confusing within the system, but it becomes increasingly difficult to communicate that to the public. And when you lose the faith of the public, then you're in trouble. I mean, so a big part of this is about sort of the flow of information, right? And so even the organizational alignment pieces, everybody sort of needs to know what it is we're trying to do and what is my role in it so I can do it well. I wanted to ask you before we wrap this thing up, I know you've got something new that you're working on, and I'm curious just because it's an interesting sort of way to think about the flow of information, but you're doing something called the Supes Choice Awards, right? Yeah. And so this is, and before we started, I even asked you to clarify, right? Because I'm like, cool, we're giving awards for stuff. Is it for the superintendent? Is it for the tech company? Whatever. So I'm going to let you explain it. But I mean, essentially what we're doing here is providing the best possible feedback to the people who can provide the solutions, right? So what is the Supes Choice Awards and how does this work?
Yeah, I started off talking about our mission to break down gaps in communication. This is that personified, and it's accessible to almost any company at any stage of development with any budget. For $600, solution providers can apply to win an award in one of several categories. And unlike we have a lot of awards in the education industry. There are awards given out by media publications. There are awards given out by investors. There are awards given out by major publishers. None of these awards are given by educators to the industry. So we're starting that this year with Supes Choice, and it's SUPS Choice, Supes Choice. That's my favorite abbreviation for superintendent, which has a lot of syllables. Others go with SUPTS. Ours is supeschoice.com. Everything's due on this Saturday, the 30th, right before Halloween. And it's a very short, simple app. We talked about keep it simple. The application, your company or organization or nonprofit or whatever, it's meant to take an hour or less to fill out. Every company that applies for Supes Choice Awards will get feedback from 5 or 6 IEI superintendents. So there's no other way. Like, throw away your MailChimp account, stop emailing these people to try to get a meeting with them. Superintendents will never read your emails if they don't know you. But the ones who are part of IEI will look at your Supes Choice application and give you some feedback on it. And those who make it to the final round of Supes Choice will get even more detailed feedback and via video from some of the nation's leading, most thoughtful superintendents. So the idea here is to level the playing field, give all companies the opportunity to get access to the leaders in our group, and use that information to go and continue to develop their solution. But this is our way to try to help the industry learn from educational leaders who understand a little bit about our folks are pretty business savvy. And so they'll be able to help companies think through all kinds of stuff, whether it's product feature sets, how they're pitching their product, or what their business model is.
Yeah, that's and it becomes something, you're just launching it now, but if it takes off, and it sounds like a great idea, it's something where, a company throws the badge on the website or, whatever.
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
it's essentially, when people say, hey, you've won this award, who gave it to me? And if it's the actual customers, it's the actual people you're serving, that always means more. Like I've won, I've had the good fortune, I've won a few teaching awards. And when it's something like, oh, hey, it was chosen by someone in leadership, so it feels good. The ones I care about the most are actually the ones that probably have the least sort of clout with them. And it's the students voted. Like when the kids voted, I'm like, well, that's who I'm working with. Like if anyone else notices, that's cool, right? But so if you're providing the service to schools and the superintendents, if the superintendents ultimately point and say, this is something that we like, or this is something we rely on, I mean, that's a pretty serious stamp of approval. How many?
These are the people who understand every aspect of a school's operation, budget, politics with board. They go into classrooms. They know a lot of the teachers. These folks understand every level of public schools. And so that's why I think their superintendents are the ideal people to look at these solutions and provide this kind of input.
That's awesome. And I mean, not that I'm not assuming every person involved in your organization is going to be reviewing the applications. I'm just curious, like approximately how many superintendents do you have contact with, say in a normal year, like maybe pre-pandemic or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in touch with hundreds. Our membership is 70 districts right now, but there's another 30 that we're talking to who I never want the group to grow more than 100 superintendents. So we're in year 4 here. Is this our 4th year? Yeah, it's 3.5 years. But we want to keep this, it's a pretty kind of tight knit selective group. So my goal is not to become a 500 superintendent thing, but rather build out new stuff that this small group of soups can do together. And so, we also bring them consulting opportunities sometime, consulting opportunities like a sort of longer form version of Soup's Choice, not where they get paid to be consultants, but rather they actually get a credit on their membership fee with us. So the district gets the credit on their membership fee with us, and then they spend an hour helping a company think through some problems. So, that's why they like being in our group. They get to do this. They get to put on a different hat for an hour. We usually do them early in the morning before work starts at the district, and think about a problem, for an hour that they might not normally get to spend an hour thinking about. So Soup's Choice will be like that. They'll get to, really nerd out on a category that they're working on and look at all these different providers out there, many of whom they have not yet met because they haven't been to an IEI event. And I'm really excited about it. And our folks are pretty excited about it. And we're doing on December 9th, we're announcing the award winners. It's also going to be, we're pairing it with an event that we started last year, virtually only, which was we sourced charitable donations from our entire vendor community. And we pooled that cash. And then we had each of our members select a charity to get their portion of that charity money. So then they got on our virtual meeting and they just told everybody, this is my charity. This is why I want to support them. And then we sent those checks out to all those charities. So we're putting these two events together now. So we'll give out the awards and we'll do the charity piece, and we'll have the judges for Soup's Choice many of them will be in the room with us. We're going to do it here in New York on December 9th, but we'll broadcast this out to anybody who wants to participate via probably a Zoom webinar, and we'll also put it up on YouTube. So you can tune in and see who wins and see what charities our members are giving money to.
It's fantastic, man. And I really do like, I mean, both as an opportunity for the vendors, for those tech companies to be able to come in and get support. And I guess not even all tech, right? But for these companies to sort of get the feedback and to get the exposure. I'm also thinking that I think, the average superintendent is a person who is very smart or very motivated or both. And, you have a tough job and you have a lot of things to do, but that's usually also the kind of person that enjoys doing something else or having something else to think about. Right.
Yeah.
And so the ability to do something that is related to my job, but not my job, should be really enticing, I think, to a lot of superintendents, just because that's right in your wheelhouse of this evaluation process and thinking about what works, but also not having the pressure of being like, I have to make a decision and present it to my community right now. It's just, I'm taking, here's what my brain is telling me. Here's what my experience says.
Yes.
And let's make this useful to someone like that. That's almost a fun thing to do from the superintendent's perspective, because you use your expertise, very little pressure compared to some of the normal decisions you might be making,
Oh, they love our stuff because they don't have to prep. They can just show up and shoot from the hip. right? What do you think of this? Great. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of what's, and then they can, spend time kind of processing things they're working on together when they're not doing that. So
Great. All right. So we're going to get ready to wrap up. And before we do, I ask everybody sort of the same two questions to end these things. The first is essentially open mic. So if there's anything you want to talk about that we haven't or we missed, you get just open mic, say your thing. And then when you're done with that, hit me with a couple of books or movies or both that you think listeners might enjoy. And that can be professional, literature. That could just be stuff you like, favorite movie, fun book to read, or any combination thereof. So is there anything else you'd like to hit on before we wrap up? And what do you think people should be checking out or reading?
cool. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. Appreciate it, Ryan. This has been great chatting with you. So I would say first, this has been one of the hardest years probably for public education ever. And the people who are working in public schools like you, or in all schools like you, and the folks I know in the IEI network, to me, to continue, showing up every day, bringing positivity, taking care of our kids, helping them learn despite enormous challenges, social, emotional, academic, etc. You folks are heroes and deserve all of us should be thanking you and asking you how we can help make your jobs easier. So thanks for all you do for kids.
Thank you. Yeah. That's Billy. What can we do? Give me money. No, I'm just joking. No, I mean, I appreciate the kind words. You're right. It's a tricky time. And so, it's very nice of you to say. So that's awesome.
Nobody can say that public schools don't know how to innovate anymore. Like, we just saw them innovate very quickly. We also saw very quickly that some of the tools we thought were going to be the silver bullets of ed tech to help kids learn online didn't quite work, needed better implementation plans, needed some tweaking. And so, I want to thank everyone on the industry side who's been kind of working feverishly. Everyone I know in a K-12 company, vendor right now, they're all like working harder than they ever have. So everyone's working hard, and we're just very lucky to get to work with such amazing people. So I'm somebody who doesn't really read books except when I'm on vacation, like end to end, but I'll pick up a chapter or two here and there. So I'm in the middle of 3 books right now, which are two of which are incredibly nerdy. One of them is my college senior thesis advisor is a man named Professor James McPherson. He wrote a book about Abraham Lincoln that I'm trying to get through, trial by fire, I think, but I'm trying to get through it for like a year. But he's just I'm a history nerd, and that's what I taught high school social studies, and I'm trying to get through that. I'm reading a book about a musicology book that I think I'm maybe one of like 50 people who maybe have ever bought and read this thing. It's called Improvisation and the Music of the Grateful Dead, and it's basically, I read this thing, and the author like does a musicological analysis of a particular live performance by the Grateful Dead. I'm a big Deadhead. And so I listen to the performance. I find it on Spotify, which is amazing that you can do now. Mm-hmm. And I listen to it and I read the guy's analysis of like how the jam broke down. And then awesome. The other,
I might buy that one. You won't be alone.
Yeah. And the third one is the book that Howard Stern put out of all of his interviews.
Okay.
I like it because it has all the stuff I like about Stern, which are these kind of like great conversations and interviews without some of the stuff I don't like. And, it distills, like reading the text of a conversation between him and like Lady Gaga or Elton John, I find very interesting. And then I'm watching this Squid Game, which is crazy.
You've done it. Yeah. See,
I'm like,
do you like it?
4 episodes in. That is a messed up show.
I resist anytime something gets that popular that like when all of a sudden 75% of the memes I see on social media are the same thing. I do everything I can not to watch it for at least a couple months. So I'm thoroughly confused about the memes. Just I'm like
control.
Yeah, I'm like I can't like. I wasn't there early. I'm not going to be the last guy on the bandwagon. I'm going to wait until no one cares anymore, and then I will check it out eventually. But yeah, I've had some weird conversations where people are trying to describe it to me, and I'm like, look, like you're not doing the show any favors right now. Like, it's not sounding appealing.
People who created that thing have serious problems. Yet I keep watching.
Well, you're not alone. So that's good. That's great. Hey, and by the way, if you're a Deadhead, this is one of my favorite. Like, oh, I need a gift for someone. If I know they like it, there's I think the guy's name is David Dodd. He used to the website's still up. He's a professor somewhere. But it's the annotated lyrics of the Grateful Dead. And
Yes,
it's like, it's
we have
beautiful.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I keep 2 copies. One is mine. And if I'm like, oh crap, I need a gift
Yeah.
for someone, I don't know if I'm like, if they are vaguely interested, like, boom, I've got one, and I always keep one as a
That's
backup.
awesome.
Yeah. So no, yeah, I will be checking out the improvisation book if no one else does. So I'm in.
Get to the author's name.
Yeah, there we go.
Cool.
All right. Well, so this has been Doug Roberts, the founder and CEO of the Institute for Education Innovation. You can find them at instituteforedinnovation.com. Doug is on Twitter at Doug Roberts _IEI. And you can go straight to IEI's Twitter at IEI _K12. Doug, is there anywhere else that people should look to get more information?
Yeah, in fact, I finally got tired of my staff telling me that the URL I bought when I was starting up is too long. So we have IEIK12.com now. So.
Hey, all right.
But yeah, no, that's it. LinkedIn, we're all over LinkedIn, and we'll be in our fall summits at the Greenbrier in West Virginia, November 14th. We have some superintendent spots if anyone's hearing this and wants to check it out. And then I think we're going to be pretty much booked on superintendents for our winter retreat on the weekend of February 10th to 13th, because it's in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But we have some partner spots available for that. And then we're Coronado Island, San Diego, April 24th. And then we're looking at Park City, Utah for the summer. So, we're busy.
That's awesome.
If you're if you're a teacher, an AP, a principal, you think you want to be a superintendent, get plugged in with our network. We'll help you sort of figure that journey out. That cohort starts January 24th ish, and IEIlead.com is where you go for info on that.
Awesome. There we go. I'll include links to all this stuff. And I don't think I want to be a superintendent, but I think I would like to join all of the retreats. So just keep an eye out. You'll be getting my resume. I'm going to find a way to sneak into these somehow. So, all right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. You can find the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming platforms, on YouTube, and at classcastpodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at ClassCast Podcast, and on Twitter at ClassCast Pod. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan.